Welcome to Know the Love of Christ. Hi everyone, here we are again studying the book of Ecclesiastes. This week we're studying chapter 6, and last week in chapter 5 we talked about vows, letting your yes be yes and your no, no. We also talked about how everyone is under someone, and ultimately we're all under God. And then we discuss the vanity of wealth, the good and the bad, and also the last little bit, verses 19 and 20, the author, Solomon, mentioned the gift that God gives us, and it's that we get to just enjoy and rejoice in our labor. So this week, Stephanie's going to read chapter 6, and then we'll get into the discussion.
All right, I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. Chapter 6. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place? All the toil of men is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun?
All right. To me, this is a continuing thought to chapter 5. I mean, everything's a continuing thought, but we tend to think it's different because it's different chapters. But if you remember in chapter 5, verses 13 and 16, he names a couple of grievous evils.
Yeah.
One being riches kept by the owner, which we discussed as greed, and riches lost in bad venture. I guess you could say gambling or risk-taking and just not taking care of those, like he gave the example of a father to a son. And then also the grievous evil in verse 16 of you can't take it with you. You just can't have it all. And then he ends it with the contrasting of the gift from God in verses 19 and 20. But like here, he's continuing on. He's saying in verses 1 and 2 about a man that gets wealth and honor, which is God-given, he says, but there's no power to enjoy it. And he's saying that's vanity and a grievous evil. What do you have about that before I share what I got?
So really, I think what I have is mostly just about the chapter on the whole. So I don't know, it may be better for you to share yours first.
I actually broke it down. I found this week was a little easier to break down than the previous chapters. So like right here, it's not what was given or not given, but the power of enjoyment or the lack thereof that is considered the grievous evil. Because like at first I thought, well, that's not right of him to say that about God,
Right.
But then that's not it. It's lack thereof of enjoying it. So that's in our power, not necessarily to, not given by God, but it's our choice whether or not we choose to enjoy that. Like Paul wrote in Philippians 4:11, for I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content. Then he goes on to list all the things he's experienced. So he chose to be content. So that was within his power. The difference in this grievous evil and the one that's in 5:19 is it says, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. So it's like our choice to accept it. So like if you remember Job, Job was wealthy and then he was totally devoid of wealth and health and prestige and friends. In chapter 122, it says Job did not sin or charge God of wrong. And if you remember when his wife tells him to just curse God and die, he tells her, can you not accept the bad with the good? So he chose to accept. So that's where I went with this. What are your thoughts? I see your eyebrows moving up and down. So
I think it's interesting. It's the same exact phrasing there in verse 2 as it is in 19. Mm-hmm. It says, everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them. And then in verse 2 it says, God gives wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God does not give him power to enjoy them. And so I was just wondering about that.
It says to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor.
Yeah, I'm looking up. There's a word, shalat, I guess is how you would say that. I don't know Hebrew very well, but the word there for power, I think this is NASB that I'm looking at over to the side. And it says, yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. Talking about the riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks. But that word means to domineer, exercise power over, dominate, have mastery, be master, or lord it over. Just interesting. But I just thought it was interesting because you were talking about how it continues on, and it really does. And a lot of times, and we've talked about this before, I think, on this podcast, the way that verses, we come to the Bible sometimes with assumptions that God put a period there, or God, like the punctuation wasn't there, but also like the chapter breaks weren't there. It was all just written together. And so man decided where to put those in. And so here is a good example of that, where the thought continues, but whoever was breaking this down decided to put a break there, which doesn't really do anything to the text, but it does something to our mind.
Yeah.
We pause there and we think, okay, well, that's a section that's finished. But really, like you said, this is a very short chapter. It's 12 verses. It's not the shortest in the book. It's the second shortest. 11 is the shortest chapter in this book. But it's interesting that they would choose to break it there, because it really does. The thought continues all the way through the chapter. 7 is the next real topic break, I would say.
Yeah.
But my thoughts on this were that throughout this, I mean, it is a continuation, but this whole chapter, the author paints a picture of lives that have the best that the world has to offer. Like he goes in there in verses 2 and 3, I think, or where it is. Yeah, 2 and 3 give us this picture of things that culturally would give you the best of what life has to offer under the sun. Because obviously we know eternal life is different. What the author is saying, which I think is what he's kind of been saying, but it's come to a head in chapter 6, is that even at its peak, at its pinnacle, at the best that life has to offer, it's still hevel.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter. Even if you have the best of the best, which here he brings out, like you said, all the riches and wealth, which before it talked about, I think chapters 5 and 6 touched on that. And even though we have all that, even though you can be blessed by God by these things, it's meaningless. It's, in the end, who does it go to? That's what it keeps bringing that out over and over. It draws that out. The author draws that out, not in it. But culturally speaking, to have that wealth was prestige and prominence. And so there are, I guess you could say, peripheral blessings that come from that, just societally and culturally. It's not only the physical stuff, but I mean, you have, I think it mentioned honor, but you have respect of your peers, and you are able to be generous because of that. We bless others with our blessings. And so there are numerous blessings that come from that. I mean, there is burden that comes with it as well. But even so, he paints that, and then he talks about a man who fathers 100 children. So culturally back then, which we live in a very child-centric culture, I mean, to a fault. But out in culture, it's almost like your children run your house. out in America today. Everything is based on the child's needs and what the child wants and that kind of thing. Whereas when God is the focus of the home, it doesn't run like that. The Bible does portray children as a blessing. If you look, let's turn to Psalm 127. But verses 3 through 5 say, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate." A man who has, what did it say, 100 children?
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty full quiver right there. I feel for his wife.
Yeah.
That's a lot. But I mean, children are seen as a blessing, but they weren't. I think we talked about this in Mark. Children were kind of a less protected entity, culturally speaking, back then. But for a woman not to have children, to be barren, that was a shameful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, having children was a blessing of life. It was a status. There's so much wrapped up into it, and I'm trying not to ramble, but try not to go too deep into it, but still touch on it. Not to have children was seen as a curse. It was a blight on your record. God had closed your womb. And it was also, culturally speaking, from what I found in that cultural commentary that I'm always talking about. Let me pull that up. Yeah, failure to produce an heir was a major calamity for a family in the ancient world because it meant a disruption in the generational inheritance pattern and left no one to care for the couple in their old age. Thus, legal remedies were developed, which allowed a man whose wife had failed to provide him with a son to impregnate a slave girl or a prostitute, and the children from this relationship could be acknowledged by the father as his heirs. Having children is something, it's part of having the best of life. Producing an heir, producing someone to carry on your lineage, because lineage was a big deal. Genealogies were a big deal, especially in the Jewish
History.
There you go, history.
Mm-hmm.
My brain was not pulling up that word. But that's another thing. And then past that is a long life. And so that's a blessing to have a long life. Of course, we know the longer our lives, the more sorrow, if you want to be ecclesiastical. I was talking with someone recently. I think I might have brought this out already, but I do think that death is a blessing and a privilege from God. We often fear it and we don't look at it in that way. But I was talking to someone who'd recently lost a child, a grown child, but a child nonetheless. And we were talking about how it's merciful that we don't live forever. Because at the point that someone does die, or you have a loss of any kind, or heartbreak, imagine having to live out your days in that misery. It is merciful of God that we are not immortal. At least in my opinion, it is. But it is seen as a blessing to live a full life. And longevity does provide for that. When we talk about people being taken too soon, we talk about young people dying who didn't, I pray sometimes, let me live long enough to meet my grandchildren, providing I'm blessed to have any. My children are still at home and very young. But, I do want to know my grandchildren and hopefully great-grandchildren. But
there's so much to say about that.
Yeah. Please say it. Say some of it.
No, I was thinking about the whole immortal thing. But we will be immortal.
We will be, but not on this earth.
No, right. It's not under the sun.
Yeah.
And so the life that we will live immortally, eternally, is going to be far greater even if we've lost loved ones.
Yes.
Who will not be there.
Right. And there are lots of questions that we all love to ask about that surrounding, like,
there's just
how,
so many.
When we know there will be no tears in heaven. We find that in Revelation.
But that goes to show you how great being such a feeble word to describe it, how great heaven will be. Mm-hmm. That sadness is not going to be sad. So, yeah. I know.
But yes, just to clarify, I was talking about immortality on earth, not in heaven. Obviously, I am very thrilled at that idea.
But yeah, verse 3 is definitely an example he gives. When he talks about having 100 children, it's more of an exaggeration.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like, even if you have 100 kids and,
Right.
you know, and
Take
you
it to the
have
nth degree.
many years. But like that in that same verse, it's but.
Yes.
So, but what? Like the soul is not satisfied with life's good things.
Yeah, and he also has no burial.
And no burial,
But that's
which is also a disgrace.
Right.
If you were either poor or you did something that was just disgraceful, to not have a burial plot, or even an actual burial, that was a disgraceful thing back then.
It's even that way now in our culture, to not have somewhere to be buried.
True.
I mean, people are cremated and that kind, but that's a choice. Like if you,
that's different.
It's different than being someone that's so poor, like homeless people. I don't know if I've ever really thought through that all the way, but people that don't have any family and bodies are not taken, I think they just cremate them and then dispose of the remains.
In the Bible, though, if you think about those who were not buried or who were told not to bury someone like Jezebel, and when Nadab and Abihu were struck down, God told Aaron, "Don't mourn."
It's like
it's because of what
they're not
done.
worthy of it. But also, when we look at burial and the ritual that's behind burial, it's meant to be a resting place. It's not eternal for those who are in the Lord. I mean, it's a resting place for your body, your physical body. But it's closure. It provides closure. You know, as Christians, we have those as well. And as followers of God, we have that. And so I feel like that's what he's speaking to here. Like, back then, these cultural norms, but however you feel about your burial, like this would be something that would be vanity. It's almost like the underlying problem that we keep seeing that he keeps bringing up, and I think we touched on it last week, is that we are trying to extend the enjoyment of these things that are only meant to be enjoyed briefly. You know, when you hold on to that McDonald's toy for 20 years, that Beanie Baby that was supposed to be worth $1 million, when you should have just played with it as a kid and enjoyed it, you know? And we can see that principle other places, but for some reason, I think it's kind of difficult spiritually to grasp.
But it's interesting how he goes into, like, verse 4. At the end of verse 3, that it's better to have been a stillborn child.
Which is one of, like, the greatest tragedies mankind ever knows. Stillborn is like a baby you could actually, like, hold. You can see it. And, I mean, with stillbirth, you are mourning with all miscarriage, but you're mourning the loss of a future.
And to call it vanity, of all things.
That is some deep, dark nooks and crannies right there. Those are.
Yeah. What was he looking at or thinking of when he was writing this? Yeah. Especially after he wrote, verse 20, saying that God will keep him busy with the joy of his heart all his life. It's like you go from this is the gift of God to, well, it's better off to have been.
I'm telling you, this guy had some serious existential anxiety. I believe I've brought this up before, but those late 2 a.m. lay in your bed and think about all the deep things kind of nights. Mm-hmm. I feel like some of these had to be written at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
So we were in the car the other day, and we were coming back, and we'd picked the kids up from some friend's house, and it was late at night, and Clark was tired, but he just started asking all these really random philosophical questions, and then he wrapped it up. Well, we were talking about kids. Clark has always maintained that he doesn't want any children. And he said something about keeping something for his kids. And I was like, whoa. I was like, so have you, I tried to be nonchalant, but of course, us moms, we're not very good at that. I was like, so have you decided that you're going to get married and have kids then when you grow up? And he was like, well, yeah, no, I don't know. Maybe. I was like, okay, hey, at least it's open now. For the longest, he's going to be in a mansion with his best friends, all 4 of them. They're going to have a no girls, boys only mansion. and be rich. He answered, and then just out of nowhere, he's like, I'm really looking forward to eternal life.
Wow.
And I was like, he's like, when I think about that, I just really feel like it's going to be great. And I'm like, me too, Clark, which it was really late. And I was just like, where did that come from?
I'm going to start calling him King Solomon.
Oh, he wouldn't know what you're talking about. But I really do feel like some of these, all that to say, some of these musings had to be late night kind of thoughts. Because he does tend to go back and forth. But at the same time, God has given us everything to enjoy, but for the timeline that he's placed on it. He placed the Sabbath on the Jews. That stipulation there, that law, that commandment. We don't have that, but God did give them a command to rest, and there's wisdom behind that, and we would do well to employ that in our own lives. The devil uses busyness as one of his devices for sure. Keeps us busy. But I do think, I do believe that Solomon here has some very dark thoughts.
Overall, though, like this book, this up and down, in and out of darkness and light, and that is our lives in a nutshell.
Oh, it is.
Like, if, we're blessed with, say, 80 years, as the Bible says, it's wrapped up in these 12 chapters. We go up and down. What's the point of life? Oh, but God has blessed me so much. And, oh, I'm going to spiral downward again. And, oh, but God has given me this gift of enjoying my life. And through the years, this is what if we were to write down our lives, this is what it would be in 12 chapters, what Solomon has written in his wisdom.
Very true. Very true. And I think the point in all that is to be able to find God in all of it. We look at trials, and it's hard to have a good attitude about trials. Who wants to suffer? We talked about this before, Romans 8:28. It's not so much God's going to make your life rosy after trials, but God's going to use that to refine you into who you should be. And he works that together for good so that you reflect Christ more than you did before. And that's the way we should look at trials. That's the way we should look at the vanity. This vanity pushes me toward my Creator because I know all these temporal things are worthless. So much of our lives, we are so busy holding on to that fake counterfeit piece of whatever it is, thinking that that's going to bring us joy and that's going to bring us happiness, and that's where our worth is, and that's what life is all about. And we've cast off the true diamond, and we don't want any part of it. But it's so easy to see when you have it in front of your face. But a lot of times I feel like as humans, we just turn away from it because this shiny distraction over here feels nice and it seems okay, why not?
I was just thinking that imagine, it's so hard to imagine, but in our finite minds, imagine how much greater heaven is. I know I said it just a second ago, but if we seeking out righteousness and being like God, imagine how much greater it is in heaven. Because if we think, oh, this is such a good blessing, or this is so great, this to have 100 kids and to live a long life, what's it going to be like in heaven if that's considered, the good stuff under the sun? To enjoy the friendships, to enjoy everything that he's already given us as examples in his book. Heaven is just going to be mind-blowing.
It is. The fact that it's described how it is, streets of gold and all that.
Think of the best
that it
stuff
could be
that we know here. And it
can't even touch it. Not really.
That a street is gold. So imagine what the rest of it is. The part you walk on and drive on, and just that's gold.
Yeah. Like Clark. It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. Oh. But also, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and then verses 10 through 12, he starts his downward spiral again, even further down.
Maybe that's why they decided to break it up how they did.
To break up the spirals?
Yeah. Have a high and a low and a high and a low, in the different topics. But
I do. I think that's what it is. Like the whole book seems to be so dark and so
Because
blah.
you remember what you end on.
Yeah, but even before you know that, if you've never read this book and you're reading it, every now and then you get this little glimpse of hope. You know, like this is the gift of God. This is his blessing. And this is, so it's like, ding, this little gem. And then, again, ding, this little gem. So it's kind of like, you're not going to go all the way down to the bottom of your spiral. Here's this little bit of hope. And then you'll see at the end why.
I get it. I understand it. I mean, some of these thoughts I've had myself, not to the extent that he has had them. He was much wiser than I will probably ever be. But it is so incredibly relatable. Like you said, it's like our lives painted out. And I think a lot of times when we pick literature and when we look at books that we love, it's because they're relatable. We sympathize or empathize with the main character in that book, or it speaks to our own experience. We like to see that we're not alone in these things. And if for nothing else, I love Ecclesiastes for that. You know, the pain and the suffering that I've been through, yeah, it's hell. And that's the way it's intended to be. God didn't set it up so I'd have a cushy life and want to stay here forever. Because if I did, what would draw me to him? Nothing. And so I can relate to that, you know, in this sense, that when life is hell, eternity does look so much more beautiful. Because light contrasts the dark. And the darker it is, the brighter the light seems. But this bright is the brightest light that, you know, ever existed. But I love verse 12 there in that dark spiral. It reminds me of James 4:14, which I had marked. Well, let's go ahead and start in verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. And it goes on to talk about saying, if the Lord wills. So even James had some of these similar thoughts.
All right, well, where do you see the love of Christ?
I see it in the fact that life is vanity, that life is hell. Like I said, if it wasn't, what would make me want to, you know, hopefully, we like to think that we would go to God willingly anyway, that even if life was wonderful and good, but, you know, it is hard to find beauty in trial and beauty in the harder things of life, but I do think I see it there, that we are provided, I guess, catalysts that help us reach toward God.
I see it in the choice that he gives us, the power to choose. I guess that would be more of the love of God, but I mean, Jesus is God, so he gives us a choice to enjoy our lives or not. But keeping in mind what lies beyond the sun is the peace that surpasses understanding. Because, you know, he says he gives us life and life abundantly to enjoy it. So that's where I see his love.
All right. Well, thank you guys again for joining us today for episode 7. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us. We'd love to study with you or connect you to someone local to you that you can study with. If you have any feedback at all, we would love to hear from you. We promise we don't like to hear the sound of our own voices, and that's why we're doing this. But we hope, as always, that you will seek to know the love of Christ in your own life. Until next time, bye.
If you like this episode, be sure and share it with someone. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.